Step back, old man, or you're next. That's what one officer shouted before they tossed my wife. As they aimed their weapons at me, I didn't yell. I just looked at their commander and said 5 words that made the entire SWAT team freeze. The neighbors on Pine Street knew Frank Sullivan as the man who could fix anything mechanical. His garage door stood open most weekends, with the sound of tools and classic rock drifting across neatly trimmed lawns. At 72, his hands weren't as steady as they once were, but they still remembered every mechanical puzzle they'd ever solved. Most didn't know about his history. The 27 years of service, the classified missions in countries whose names never appeared in public briefings, the medals kept in a shoebox rather than displayed on walls. Frank preferred it that way. Preferred to be judged by how he fixed carburetors, not how he'd once navigated operations that would never make the history books. Only Barbara knew everything. She'd stayed when the nightmares came, when the scars, both visible and invisible, needed tending. Their 46 years of marriage had weathered deployments, silence, and the slow process of Frank becoming a civilian again. Their modest ranch-style home had become a quiet refuge. Frank volunteered at the Veterans Center on Thursdays, built wheelchair ramps for disabled veterans on Saturdays, and spent Tuesdays at the high school teaching auto shop to kids other teachers had written off. The teenagers respected him, not because they knew his service record, but because he respected them first, seeing potential where others saw only problems. As Frank often told Barbara, some things are worth fighting for. Some people are worth fighting for. The trick is knowing the difference. That Wednesday afternoon was unremarkable. Frank was beneath Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick, changing the oil as a favor. Barbara had gone for groceries. Wednesday was senior discount day at Palmer's Market. The September air carried the first hint of autumn. The first indication that something was wrong was the screech of tires. Too aggressive for their peaceful street, too purposeful. Frank rolled out from under the car just as the first black SUV blocked his driveway. 3 more followed, then the shouting began. Police! Everyone on the ground now. Men in tactical gear poured from vehicles, weapons raised, faces hidden behind helmets and shields. Frank stood slowly, hands visible, engine grease still staining his fingers. There's some mistake, he began, but a rifle barrel gestured him into silence. Down on the ground now. Frank complied. Concrete pressed against his cheek as boots surrounded him. Through the chaos of radios and shouted commands, he heard one officer say, "Secure the house," while another zip-tied his wrist behind his back. That's when Barbara's car pulled into the driveway. She stepped out, grocery bags in both arms, confusion blooming across her face. "Frank, what's happening?" 3 officers immediately pivoted, weapons trained on Barbara's 68-year-old frame. "Drop the bags. Hands where we can see them." Barbara froze. Paper bags clutched to her chest. "Please, She's not complying. A younger officer's voice cracked with adrenaline. "Ma'am, final warning." Barbara began to lower the bags, but her arthritic hands couldn't move fast enough. Non-compliant subject. Frank's voice cut through the chaos. "She's my wife. She's just carrying groceries." A boot pressed harder against his back. "Step back, old man, or you're next." The SWAT commander approached Frank, his tactical vest displaying the insignia of team leader. "We have intelligence that this property is connected to a high-level weapons trafficking operation. Carlos Mendez. Ring any bells?" Frank managed to turn his head enough to make eye contact. "This is 1472 Pine Street." "You want 1472 Pine Avenue." Different zip code entirely. The commander hesitated, uncertainty flickering across what little was visible of his face beneath the tactical helmet. "Check the address." He ordered one of his team. Frank could see the doubt beginning to form, the first cracks in their certainty. But it was already too late to prevent what happened next. The young officer stepped forward, drawing his taser. Barbara's eyes widened in fear. Non-compliant subject. The taser fired. Barbara's body convulsed as electricity coursed through her. Grocery bags exploded across the driveway. Eggs shattering, apples rolling beneath tactical boots, milk splashing across concrete. She collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. Frank didn't panic, didn't scream, With trained discipline that decades of civilian life hadn't erased, he focused on the officer with command insignia. "Let me up," he said with quiet authority. Something in his tone made the commander pause. The commander hesitated, then nodded. As Frank rose to his feet, still zip-tied, he looked directly into the man's eyes. Around them, the tactical team maintained their positions, weapons still trained, radios still crackling with tactical chatter. One of the younger officers scoffed. "That's supposed to scare us. Old man, we're executing a warrant for a dangerous suspect. Save the tough guy act." Frank's expression didn't change. His eyes remained fixed on the commander, assessing, calculating. The eyes of a man who had faced far worse situations and remained standing afterward. Frank stood straight, dignity intact despite the plastic restraints. With deliberate calm, he spoke 5 words that changed everything. "Call Admiral Wilson right now." The SWAT commander blinked, momentary confusion crossing his face. Frank continued, his voice steady despite Barbara still lying motionless on the concrete. "This is 1472 Pine Street. You want 1472 Pine Avenue. Different zip code entirely." His voice remained steady. "Now cut these restraints and call Admiral James Wilson at Naval Special Warfare Command." "Sir, I need to attend to my wife," Frank added. "She has a heart condition." The commander hesitated, uncertainty creeping into his professional facade. "Check the address," he ordered one of his team. While they verified, Frank spoke again. "Left inside pocket of my jacket. Look, but don't touch." The commander cautiously approached and, reaching into Frank's jacket pocket with gloved hands, withdrew a worn metallic insignia with a serial number, unmistakable to anyone with military or law enforcement background. "Special Operations Service Number," Frank said quietly. The mood changed instantly. Even the radio chatter seemed to quiet. One of the tactical team members, older than the others, whispered something to Commander. "Sir, that's not just military credentials. That's high-level special operations." The commander's demeanor shifted immediately. "Get the medic over here now," he barked. "Cut his restraints." As Frank knelt beside Barbara, checking her pulse with practiced fingers, the operation crumbled around him. One officer frantically worked his phone, presumably verifying Frank's identity. Another radio dispatched to confirm the address discrepancy. "You hit the wrong house," Frank stated flatly, helping Barbara to a sitting position as the medic arrived. "You didn't bother to verify. You escalated without cause, and you used excessive force on a senior citizen carrying groceries." Across the street, a neighbor filmed the entire scene from his porch. Later, he would tell reporters, "He just said 5 words, and the SWAT team lowered their rifles, like watching someone flip a switch." The commander approached Frank, his helmet now removed, revealing a face blanched with realization. "Sir, we had intelligence that—" "You had nothing," Frank interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that made the officer step back. "What you had was adrenaline and authority without accountability." Barbara's eyes fluttered open, confusion and pain evident. "Frank, I'm here," he assured her, then looked back at the commander. "I'm taking my wife inside now. Your team will remain outside. You'll call Admiral Wilson immediately." The young officer who had fired the taser stood frozen, the weight of his mistake visibly crushing him. As Frank helped Barbara to her feet, another team member quietly collected the scattered groceries, a futile gesture of apology. As they walked slowly toward their front door, the whispers among the tactical team told Frank everything. Database searches had confirmed his identity. His name had appeared on lists they weren't supposed to know existed. Lists that made even hardened SWAT officers nervous. 40 minutes passed inside the Sullivan home. Barbara rested on the sofa, an ice pack pressed against her chest where the taser barbs had struck. Frank sat beside her, one hand always touching hers, his eyes frequently checking the driveway through parted curtains. The SWAT team remained outside, their earlier bravado deflated. 2 officers had been dispatched to the correct address, only to discover that their target had moved months ago. The command vehicle's radio traffic had shifted from tactical operations to damage control. When the black SUV with military plates pulled up, it did so without sirens or flash, just a deliberate stop behind the police vehicles. The man who emerged wore no uniform, just a charcoal suit that suggested authority, without needing insignia. Admiral James Wilson stood a moment, surveying the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had assessed far more dangerous situations. At 65, with silver hair cut to regulation precision, he moved with purpose toward the house without acknowledging the SWAT commander who hurried to intercept him. Frank met him at the door. The two men stood silently for a moment, decades of shared history speaking in the silence between them. Then, with precise formality, Admiral Wilson raised his hand in a crisp salute. Frank returned it, his first salute in 12 years. "They told me you were out of the game for good," Wilson said finally. "Only professionally," Frank answered. Wilson's gaze moved past him to Barbara on the sofa. His jaw tightened visibly. When he turned to face the assembled tactical team, the Admiral's voice carried across the front yard, without needing to shout. Authority radiated from him like heat. "This man," he began, gesturing toward Frank, "trained operators who wrote the procedures you just violated." The officer who had deployed the taser stood trembling as Admiral Wilson approached him. "Your equipment. Now." Without protest, the young man removed his tactical vest, sidearm, and badge, placing them on the hood of the nearest vehicle. "You're relieved. Report to your captain for administrative reassignment." No one spoke as the officer walked to a patrol car and sat inside, head bowed in the realization that his career had just imploded. Wilson turned back to Frank, reaching inside his suit jacket. He withdrew a sealed envelope and extended it. "This contains two things," the Admiral explained quietly. "A formal apology from the department and reinstatement of your credentials. We need you back, Frank. The world hasn't gotten any safer." Frank looked at the envelope, but made no move to take it. "The world never changes, James," he replied. "Just the uniforms and the weapons." He glanced back at Barbara, who watched from the doorway. "My service is to her now, and to the people who need car repairs, not tactical solutions." Wilson nodded, understanding in his eyes. He placed the envelope on the porch railing. "The offer stands," he said simply, then turned to leave. Frank never opened the envelope. Some offers didn't need consideration to be answered. A week later, Police Chief Michael Brennan called a press conference. Standing behind a podium flanked by American flags, he announced what the department was calling the Sullivan Protocol, a new mandatory training program emphasizing de-escalation, proper identification procedures, and respecting the dignity of civilians during all interactions. He never mentioned Frank or Barbara by name. Didn't have to. The video had gone viral despite attempts to suppress it, and the community knew exactly what had prompted this sudden commitment to reform. Within the police department, the changes went deeper than public relations. Veterans on the force were consulted on training procedures. Address verification became a multi-step process. Officers were paired with community mentors from diverse backgrounds. For the young officer who had used his taser too quickly, redemption came in the form of community service. Specifically, volunteering at the Veterans Center, where Frank taught auto repair skills to disabled vets. The first day had been awkward, the second day less so. By the third week, something like respect had begun to grow in the space where fear and authority had once ruled. Barbara recovered slowly. The taser hadn't worsened her heart condition, thankfully, but bruises bloomed across her chest where the barbs had struck. She never spoke of the pain, not the physical kind, nor the deeper injury of being treated as a threat in her own driveway. But something had changed in her posture. She stood tall beside Frank at the grocery store, met the eyes of officers they passed, refused to be diminished by what had happened. Frank continued his routines. Mrs. Henderson's Buick got its oil change. The Veterans Center still saw him on Thursdays. The high school auto shop students still learned that second chances were sometimes hidden beneath engine grease and patient instruction. But the neighborhood noticed the differences. How every patrol car slowed near the Sullivan driveway, how officers nodded first when they passed Frank on his morning walks, how an unmarked black SUV appeared occasionally, its driver leaving small packages on the porch. Books, bottles of good whiskey. Once, a restored photograph of a much younger Frank standing among men whose faces were carefully blurred. The incident had exposed something, and not just about law enforcement. 3 months after the incident, a rookie officer's cruiser broke down near the Sullivan home. Frank emerged from his garage with tools before the young man had even called for assistance. As they worked together beneath the hood, the officer finally gathered his courage. "Sir," he began hesitantly, "everyone at the academy talks about you now, about what happened. They say you could have ended careers that day with one phone call. Why didn't you?" Frank tightened the bolt before answering. "Because revenge doesn't fix engines," he said simply. "And it doesn't fix people either." The cruiser's engine started on the first try after that. Frank wiped his hands on a rag and stepped back. "Thank you, sir," the young officer said, respect evident in every syllable. "Frank," he corrected. "Just Frank." The officer nodded, understanding the lesson went beyond automobile repair. Later that week, a reporter cornered Frank outside the Veterans Center, microphone extended aggressively. "Mr. Sullivan, why didn't you fight back when they attacked your wife? You had the training. You had the right. Why just 5 words instead of action?" Frank looked directly into the camera, his expression neither angry nor proud. "Because 5 words were louder than fear," he said. "And sometimes the strongest position isn't the one where you're standing over someone else. It's where you're standing your ground." He walked away then, back to his truck, back to the life he'd chosen after decades of service. Just a man who fixed things, who understood that some forms of power never needed to raise their voice to be heard, who had learned that true authority often spoke most clearly through mercy rather than might. If you believe real heroes don't need to yell, leave a respect in the comments. Subscribe for more stories of quiet strength that change lives forever.